right. Well, Representative Michael Baumgartner, thanks for meeting up with us here today. I want to talk about your first 100 days in office. You're a freshman congressman. How has it been? What would you say is the most, significant accomplishment you've made in the first couple of months?
Well, I just feel like I'm working really hard for the people of Eastern Washington. It's a real privilege to get to do that. And so getting established in Congress and having fun enjoying that. If I had to say what's the biggest thing we've done in Congress in those 100 days, I would say it's really securing the southern border. That was the biggest issue in the election. I think the one that the American people felt the most uncomfortable about. And you've seen where with new leadership in Washington, D.C., this 11 million people that came across the border last year, it's now down to almost zero right now on a monthly basis. So I think that's been our biggest accomplishment.
And that's something that you campaigned on, border security and immigration reform. So on that note, how do you think you've done in achieving that?
I think we've done well. And why does border security matter? Well, of course, you can't be a sovereign country unless you control your borders. But also, we've seen over 100,000 Americans killed by fentanyl last year. It is an absolute scourge. That fentanyl comes over mainly from the southern border and comes into our communities. So, border security isn't just about national security. It's about making our community safe here at home, and it is about trying to stop fentanyl deaths. So it's all connected, but I care a lot about that fentanyl issue as well, too. And so it's connected to our border security.
The work's not done yet, right?
No, certainly not at all. We had a wonderful opportunity last night with Gabriel's Challenge kicking off here in Spokane. I think a lot of people in our community know Katara Johnson-Jones and how sad it was that her son Gabriel died of fentanyl poisoning, and I was pleased to join with them last night to kick off this period from Mother's Day to Father's Day to try to get our community to step forward and stop fentanyl, and a very important issue.
One thing that stood out as a significant accomplishment is you're the first freshman member to pass a bill on the House floor, the Deterrent Act. What was that like? Tell me about that one.
Yeah, there were 4 freshmen elected leadership positions when we came in. I ran for the policy position as a freshman. I was elected to that, so it's nice to be focused on by your colleagues, and I'm a policy guy at heart, so it's nice to come with that kind of wind at your sails. And I was the first freshman in the 119th Congress to get a bill across the House floor. That's a bill, there's a lot of negative Chinese influence on college campuses. I don't want us to be in a war with China. I don't think anybody does. The best way to not be in a war with China is prepare for a war with China. Right now, we're not prepared, and part of that is the fact that China's doing a lot of nefarious activities on college campuses. So what my bill does is put more sunlight on what China's doing on college campuses, and now we've gotten it out of the House. Now we got to go work on it in the Senate and see if we can get it at the president's desk.
How have universities responded to this bill?
Well, it's been mixed. Universities like Washington State University, they've been great, but some other universities like Harvard and some others have been a little more touch and go with it. Universities have been getting a lot of money from China. They don't necessarily like to disclose how much money they've been getting from China, and so it's an ongoing conversation. But universities, I'm a big fan of universities. My major legislation when I was in the state Senate was the new WSU Medical School that I worked together with both Republicans and Democrats to help get accomplished. But I've done a lot of work on higher education policy. Right now, our colleges and universities have done a lot of things that have lost trust with the American people, so we're trying to regain that trust and working through a series of issues.
You've had a few different town halls. You made it your mission to have a town hall in all 12 counties in your district. I guess, how are you doing in achieving that?
Well, we're doing well. Okay. We've done 6 or 7 town halls so far. We're going to do more, and I'm a big believer in the First Amendment, and I always say at the start of my town halls, whether you voted for me or didn't vote for me, I represent you. So I work for everybody in the district. Of late, you've seen some of the town halls get a little spicy. It can be kind of more protest town halls, and I don't mind that, but we just need to make sure that they're carried forth in a safe way. And town halls are, of course, better if people can both speak, share their ideas, and then listen. So we'll be looking forward to doing more town halls here in coming months, and I'm very determined we're going to get 12 town halls, one in each county here in our first year in office.
That's good. And I know you kind of touching on the spicy town halls. I know you've recently described some of them as a bit combative. So what do you think is driving the anger or frustration among some constituents?
Well, some of it is genuine, but nobody's going to be shocked. Shocked there's gambling in this establishment, like they say in Casablanca, that hey, politics breaks out at town halls. And I think, look, I'm a Republican. I work in a very bipartisan way, but I'm a proud Republican. And I think nobody's surprised that some of the Democratic base or their party wants to use these town halls as a method for protest and to try to make a political act out of it. And that's okay too. I mean, that's part of the American political system. So I think a lot of it has been driven by that. And then we just have a very politically divided country right now. There are some real hot button issues that people are concerned about, and again, that's fine. I just want to make sure that the town halls are conducted in a way that's safe and that people have the opportunity to express their ideas and to listen to each other. So that's why it's better if the temperature can come down in those town halls and we can do more of them.
Yeah. And to kind of speak to that, I guess what have you learned from the most critical voices at these town halls? I know we covered the Ritzville and the Spokane town halls. They got a bit heated. So what would you say you've learned the most from the most critical voices, and has any of the feedback from those voices maybe changed how you approach Congress?
Well, I think it's, look, this is my 15th year being an elected official. I was a state senator for 8 years. I was a treasurer for 6 years. So I've worked in both state government, county government, and federal government. And I think at the end of the day, people are very concerned about the future. And sometimes we just get the opportunity to listen, hear their concerns. And people don't always have full information. They hear things like there's going to be big cuts to Medicaid spending. Well, in fact, under any scenario, the federal government will be spending more money on Medicaid next year than they are this year. And then, you have this opportunity to say, look, right now, the federal government is going to spend $7 trillion next year on the back of $5 trillion in revenue. And we already have a $37 trillion deficit. So whatever you think the government should be spending money on, I think most people think it's not fair to our kids and to our grandkids and to future generations to continue to spend so much debt and so much deficit. So let's talk about not necessarily whether programs are good or bad, but what's the way you can deliver programs for the most needy in a more efficient way and prioritize resources. And I think when you have that conversation with the folks on a one-on-one basis, or even in a small group, or even in a town hall basis, you can find common ground and people can work together because, again, we are a divided country, but we're all Americans at the end of the day.
I'll come back to the town hall in a second. You mentioned Medicaid. We know that House Republicans just unveiled a budget that includes a pretty big cut to Medicaid. I guess, what is your opinion on the proposed cuts as it relates to the impacts of Medicaid?
Well, again, we will be spending more money on Medicaid next year than we are this year. So whether that's a cut or not depends on how you look at the math, or you look at government math, or you look at kitchen table math. But again, we have a $37 trillion debt. We're going to have at least $2 trillion more in debt. How much farther is America going to dig itself into a hole? Are we going to start to reform programs? When Bill Clinton was president, both Democrats and Republicans did things like welfare reform and work reform. And really what the heart of the Republican plan is to take able-bodied adults who weren't intended to be on Medicaid and those that don't have kids and put work requirements on them and say, hey, if the government and the public is going to continue to fund your health care and you're able to work, we expect you to get off the couch, put down the Cheetos, put down the video games, and get back in the labor market. And that's good for those folks as well, too. So that's really the heart of the Medicaid issue. Also, under the Biden administration, about 2 million illegal immigrants were put onto Medicaid. And I think most Americans don't think that we should be enticing folks to come into our country illegally, and they shouldn't be getting health care paid for by the American people.
How do we know that number of illegal immigrants are?
It's based on estimates on what California did and other across states. Gavin Newsom Medicaid is a matching program from the federal government to the state program. So fundamentally, states can do whatever they want to with Medicaid spending. It is simply the federal portion that we're matching. States like California decided to extend public health care payments for illegal immigrants. The federal government under the Biden administration picked up some of the matching numbers on that. To me, that's not a priority. I don't think most American people don't think that's a priority given how much debt that we're in, and it actually creates more of a problem with illegal migration. So really the heart of the Republican plan is two things. If you're able to work, we want you to be back in the labor force if you're going to get Medicaid, and two, illegal migrants should not be getting Medicaid. And I think that's something that if you explain it to them in the true and honest fashion, the vast majority of the American people agree on that. I mean, it's something that Bill Clinton and Democrats and Republicans were able to do in the 90s. And quite frankly, whether you're talking about Medicaid right now or in the future, we are $37 trillion in debt. This year we are spending $7 trillion in spending on the back of $5 trillion in revenue, and people know that can't go on. So there's going to have to be reforms of some of these programs, and hopefully this bill will come together and make a significant contribution to common sense and fiscal responsibility moving forward.
So it sounds like you're kind of in line with House leadership, Republican leadership, and the fact that these cuts reduce waste, potentially even claims of fraud, in line with Medicaid. Is that fair?
That's right. Medicaid is a really broken system. It is a matching system between the federal government and the state government. Some states like Washington State expanded Medicaid spending, and they have a lot more problems fiscally than states like Wisconsin and Texas that didn't do Medicaid expansion. They have a better fiscal situation. And right now, it's such a convoluted program. The federal government spends different amounts of money at a different ratio depending on what state you're in. And that doesn't make a lot of sense to treat the states differently. Again, there's a lot of problems in the American healthcare spending situation, but what do we think the American taxpayers should pay? And again, how far do we want to go into debt to fund people that are able to work, getting free health care, and people that are in the country illegally getting free health care? And I think most Americans say not any at all.
Well, and Michael, I want to drill down on that. The Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office says the proposal would reduce quite a number of people with health care, as far as 8.6 million people over a decade, reducing their access to health care. Isn't that a red flag to you as far as the cuts go?
Well, again, a lot of those folks that are getting the health care right now, they're able to work, and by putting that work requirement on them, they'll either be able to go back in the labor force and get different either employer-provided health care or other health care. And again, a significant portion of that, 2 million people are in the country illegally on Medicaid, so that's a portion, as well too. There will still be more money spent on Medicaid next year than there is this year under the Republican budget proviso. And at some point, if you're serious about $37 trillion in debt and running 20% deficits every year, you're going to have some reforms to the programs. And even the Democrats know that. I mean, look, they're in the minority. They're going to vote no. And of course, they're going to do politics and have the screams and cries. But if you have private conversations with the Democrats behind the scenes, they know that Medicaid has to be reformed. And if we're going to get serious about our budget deficits, and of course, right now we have a country, again, one of the biggest threats that we have right now is a rising China. Right now, we are not prepared. Again, I do not want a war with China, but the best way to avoid a war with China is prepare for war with China. Right now, we're not prepared. So there are some things that we have to do in our defense spending to prepare for that. So we need to look at a series of reforms across the board that help both grow our economy to increase revenue and economic growth, and also redefine spending in most places.
I do want to touch on some recent incidents here locally in Spokane. So Spokane County has seen an increase in ICE and Border Patrol activity, some videos even going viral, one in particular of an arrest where ICE agents smashed in a truck window. My question to you is, what is your opinion on the use of force in these situations?
Well, unfortunately, Washington State has taken, as a state government from Olympia, has taken some really dangerous steps to tell local government officials that they can't work with federal government officials. For example, I've been told that right now there's a South American gang member in the Spokane County Jail with a bullet in his calf muscle. And in a state that was properly working with the federal government, because immigration enforcement is a clear role in our Constitution of the federal government, ICE would be able to go into a courthouse. And the reason why ICE likes going into courthouses is because they're behind metal detectors and that it's safer for folks. But right now, ICE should be able to go into a courthouse, and when that person is getting released from the county jail, they could be there to apprehend him, process him, and get him out of the country. But with this crazy and dangerous Washington state law, this sanctuary state law, that means that instead of doing that there, ICE then has to get him released. Then there's going to take more resources to find where he is. And then when they go to arrest him, it's going to take 6 to 8 guys in body armor and be much more dangerous for the individual, much more dangerous for the family, and more people that are nonviolent offenders are going to get swept up in what's going on, the less priority things.
So you're saying state law, state sanctuary law is essentially forcing ICE agent hands for this.
It's
this
making
more
it,
violent
yes,
approach.
it is making it more dangerous, absolutely, and much more dangerous for the community as well too. Look, we don't want violent offenders who are in the country legally to be here. And many of the folks that are being apprehended already have orders to leave the country and are yet have not been processed. And again, this is all against the backdrop of a Biden administration that let over 12 million people into the country illegally, abusing the refugee processing system. And if you look at the total numbers of people that have been moved out of the country, the amount that were removed under Bill Clinton and Barack Obama far exceed anything that Donald Trump has done. Under Barack Obama, over nearly 450,000 people were moved out of the country one year. Under the Trump administration, they've never even gotten close to that number, because each, of course, is much more high profile when it's done by Trump, and then and the left fights it each and every step of the way. So they've created there's a problem they're trying to solve that hasn't been created. And one of the best ways to solve the problem is if folks will self-deport. So right now it costs the American taxpayers nearly $20,000 each time an illegal migrant is processed and deported.
How do we know that?
It's reporting by ICE and by the federal government. Just the average, how much money we spend. Look at how much money is spent on moving people to the country versus how many people are moved. It's pretty simple math. That's why the ICE is considering offering $1,000 payment just to leave the country voluntarily. But just to finish, one of the reasons that I think the Trump administration has been so high profile in terms of some of these folks moving out of the country is, one, to tout their accomplishments, but two, to create the environment and the incentives for people to self-deport. So instead of spending $20,000 per person if you're here illegally, people just remove themselves.
And as far as just kind of dial down a little bit, so do you think the current protocols adequately protect individual rights during these arrests, protocols within ICE and Border Patrol?
Well, I believe so. I mean, you'd have to look at each individual case, but if someone's a violent offender that's been dangerous and is in the country illegally, I certainly, first and foremost, care about the law enforcement officers are going to arrest them. And, you know, not everything that happens on a short video clip, and I think people know, is not the entire story on each and every case. And then the final just...
Were they following, I mean, we don't know. We've asked Border Patrol to answer this question, but we don't know if they were even following protocol when the windows were smashed in and there's a pregnant woman in the front seat. So, and in that regard, I mean, should there be a change to how these encounters are handled?
Well, again, these are violent offenders that have a criminal record largely, and then it would be better if Washington State was not a sanctuary state, because then a lot of these folks could be apprehended in conjunction with local law enforcement. I mean, it's much more dangerous for those for the folks from ICE the way it has to be done now. And then just another important piece of this is with this crazy and dangerous sanctuary state and sanctuary community law is the number one takeaway from the 9/11 Commission after the terrible terrorist attacks of 9/11 was that state and local, all levels of law enforcement had to be able to talk to each other to avoid a future terrorist attack. And we've had over 12 million people come into the country illegally. And when I was down at the border last year, and watched folks just where the Trump wall finished and they just walked right around the wall and declared themselves to be refugees. I mean, we watched Chinese nationals, we watched people from Central Africa, and we watched folks from Syria come into the country. Many people from states, not saying they're necessarily terrorists, but we don't know the countries that they're coming in from. So it has really increased the terrorist threat as well too. So the best thing that could happen would be for Olympia to reverse course and work with federal government officials to get people out of the country as safely as they can and try to rebalance this immigration issue. And once that happens, then we can have conversations about comprehensive immigration reform. And but until you secure the border, that can't happen.
I do want to be mindful of the time, I guess, looking ahead. So you've finished your first 100 days, first couple of months as a freshman member. What are the top 3 priorities you have going forward into the next phase as Congressman?
Well, just continue to fight hard for Eastern Washington, you know, doing a lot to try to protect our dams and our agricultural way of life, making sure Fairchild Air Force Base continues to be protected. It's such an important part of our community. And then supporting schools and education. You know, you talk about my favorite things the first 100 days. One of my favorite things was each member of Congress gets 1 ticket to the President's State of the Union address. I decided to give mine to a teacher. We had a wonderful time with a teacher coming out from Wilbur Creston. That was a really neat event. Also, you know, I've made my first what's called a congressional delegation visit. I'm on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and I got to go back to Iraq for the first time since 2008 to look at our counterterrorism operations in the Gulf. I was at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. We have folks from Fairchild there right now, and so we'll continue to work hard for Eastern Washington. And like I said, you know, whether you voted for me or not, you know, I'm your representative, and we want to do the best we can to represent the people here.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's always great to see you.